There's a scene that plays out every day on millions of cell phones around the world. He wakes up, looks at the screen, no notifications. His heart races, not from emotion but from absence. So he gives in, he types a good morning with a forced emoji, perhaps a phrase that sounds spontaneous but has been thought out, rewritten, edited. He sends it, and waits. That message wasn't a gesture of affection, it was a cry for help disguised as affection. An implicit code. See me, notice me, choose me. This is most men's blind spot. The error isn't in the search for connection, but in the desperate display of the desire to be seen. And this is where many lose the game before even the first move. The problem isn't feeling. The problem is begging. And when you do that, even if disguised as kindness, your body, your intonation, your timing, your digital language reveal something no woman will verbalize, but all will feel. A kind of emotional weakness that cuts through sexual tension like a dull knife cuts through charm. Friedrich Nietzsche, in Beyond Good and Evil, stated, "Everything that originates in weakness is evil." Too strong? But in seduction, this thought carries the weight of natural law. A woman feels before she understands. She reacts before she rationalizes. And if something in her senses that you need her for validation, the game changes, and not in her favor. It's instinctive, it's biological, and it's cruel. The man who demonstrates a need to be seen loses power precisely because he's already surrendered his emotional scepter. The irony? He thinks he's being kind, honest, available. But the female perception is different. Insecure, begging for attention. And this triggers a repulsion she herself can't explain. What seemed like connection becomes pressure. What sounded sweet becomes heaviness. What was presence becomes neediness. But the most tragic thing is that all of this stems from a legitimate desire, a human desire, to be desired, to be important to someone, to be remembered. The philosopher Ortega y Gasset said that love is the surrender provoked by fascination. But fascination at its core is born of scarcity, of mystery, of enigma. The man who is always available is never a mystery, he is predictable. And predictability in the world of attraction is like a tranquilizer. It neutralizes the adrenaline of desire. You may not realize it, but there's an almost childish behavior behind most anxious messages. The child who shouts, "Look at me," in the middle of the room still lives inside many adult men. Only now, instead of shouting, he sends messages, reacts to stories, comments with emojis, tries anything to receive a sign of validation. And women sense this. Not logically, but biologically. And the more you display yourself to be seen, the more invisible you become. You might be wondering, so should I feign disinterest? Walk away? No. It's not about creating artificial absence, it's about building selective presence. Seduction is a dance, and dancing requires rhythm. If you step too far into her space, the dance becomes a rush. True power lies in knowing when to stop dancing, when to back off, when to let her take a step forward. And this only happens when you understand the value of silence. Silence, in seduction, is a subtle weapon. It's the space where mystery blossoms, where the other person begins to wonder, where tension builds. The man who masters strategic silence, the one who knows he doesn't have to answer everything right away, who doesn't comment on everything he sees, who doesn't justify every move, that man becomes fascinating. Because he's not overly available. He's not trying to prove value. He knows that value isn't shouted, it's felt. You might think this is playing a game, that it's manipulation. But the reality is harsher. The game plays out even if you refuse to play. The difference is that those who refuse to play lose by default. A woman is biologically conditioned to test the consistency of your emotions. And if you give her everything on a silver platter at first, attention, compliments, plans, emotional exposure, you rob her of her own journey of discovery. She needs to move emotionally toward you, not be dragged along by your desperation. A study conducted by psychologist Dr. Monica Moore of Webster University revealed that the most powerful signals of attraction came not from appearance or status, but from the way men behaved in subtle moments of interaction. The most attractive were those who knew how to look and then look away, to speak and then remain silent, to appear and then disappear. They created emotional tension, the secret fuel of desire. You need to understand one thing. Men and women fall in love in different ways. Men are visual and instantaneous. Women are emotional and contextual. While men are captivated by image, women are attracted by impact. And impact isn't born of consistency, it's born of contrast. Therefore, the more linear you are, the less room she has to imagine. And without imagination, there is no desire. Seduction without imagination is like music without pause, noise. Most men who have suffered the most rejection were never rejected for what they said, but for what they revealed without realizing it. They gave themselves away too soon. They showed they were investing more than they were receiving. And every woman has a radar for emotional imbalance. If you're more interested than she is, she feels pressured. If you're less interested, she feels challenged. And women pursue challenge, not certainty. Robert Greene in The Art of Seduction defines this dynamic as the reverse investment principle. The more she invests emotionally in understanding who you are, the more valuable you become. But this is only possible when you stop trying to be chosen and start being enigmatic. This doesn't mean being cold. It means having an internal structure so solid that it doesn't need to be fed by external confirmation. The tragedy of modern man is that he's learned to seek affection like an emotional orphan. And social media has only intensified this. With every like, every reply, he feels momentarily seen. But women, especially high-value women, quickly sense when a man is too thirsty for attention. And this kind of thirst stinks. It stinks of insecurity, lack, dependence. The true seducer is the one who sees himself before being seen, who doesn't need the spotlight because he already has an inner light, who doesn't need to show off because he already has clarity. He's a man whose presence speaks louder than his words. And for this very reason, when he sends a message, she stops. When he appears, she notices. When he speaks, she listens. Now imagine two men. The first says good morning every day. She worries, asks questions, makes herself available. The second disappears for days, but when she speaks, she brings intensity, purpose, presence. The first seems needy, the second seems busy. The first seems waiting, the second seems alive. Guess who she'll respect more, desire more? Guess who will leave her confused and intrigued? The answer lies in the space between gestures. That's where power manifests. Because the great truth is, she needs to imagine to surrender. And you can't be the man who suppresses her imagination. You need to be the one who provokes her. The one who doesn't give everything away. The one who creates silences filled with tension. The one who understands that desire arises more from what's unsaid than from what's blatant. And when you master this art of being present without being invasive, of being emotional without being needy, of being selective without being distant, you'll realize something magical. It's not that you've become more attractive. It's that you've become rarer. And in a world where everyone screams to be seen, the man who knows how to be silent hypnotizes. You walk into the restaurant. She's beautiful, her smile wide, her eyes attentive. The conversation flows. The wine warms the atmosphere. And then the inevitable question, but what about you? What do you do for a living? It's at this very moment that many men, in the name of honesty, commit what I call first impression emotional suicide. They bow down to their own uncertainty, and they say things like, man, I'm still a little lost, trying to figure out my path. Does it sound genuine? Does it sound humble? Maybe it does. But in the language of attraction, this sounds like an alarm bell, a silent warning of emotional instability and a lack of direction. See, most men grew up believing that sincerity equals connection. But in practice, a woman isn't just listening to what you say, she's listening to what you project. And when you say you don't know what you're doing for a living, what she hears is, I'm not a safe bet. It may sound cruel, but this filter isn't rational, it's biological, evolutionary. She's not looking for financial certainty, she's looking for emotional solidity, clarity of mind, firmness of purpose. And when you present yourself as someone who's still searching for meaning, she instinctively feels she'll need to be more of a mother than a lover. And that changes everything. Because security isn't a woman's rational need, it's a neurological urgency. Since ancient times, women have needed to connect with partners who know how to provide, protect, and plan for the future. Today the context is different, but the genetic code still pulses the same. Even if she's independent, successful, and free, her archaic mind seeks emotional consistency. And there's nothing less consistent than a man who hesitates in the face of his own history. And herein lies the great contradiction. Many men think that by expressing their doubts about the future, they're being authentic. And they are. But they confuse authenticity with a lack of direction. A man may not know exactly where he's going, but he needs to know the road he's chosen. What kills attraction isn't the uncertainty of the path, it's the lack of presence along the way. She wants to feel that you're moving, that you're under construction, that there's a mission, even if it doesn't yet have a detailed map. When you say, "I don't know what I'm doing with my life," you hand over the burden of emotional leadership in the relationship to her. And believe me, she doesn't want to carry that burden. She may even be empathetic at first, but over time, something inside her begins to distance herself. Not because you're weak, but because you made her feel insecure. And a woman who doesn't feel secure doesn't surrender. She observes, analyzes, hesitates, until one day, she simply disappears. Robert Greene, in The Art of Seduction, talks about the power of narrative in building desire. The man who masters his story, even if it's in fragments, generates magnetism. He can say, "I left my last job because I realized I needed to create something of my own. I'm still structuring this project, but I'm excited about the journey." See, there's no arrogance here. There's direction. There's energy. There's a sense of identity in the making. And that, paradoxically, is much more powerful than saying, "I'm already the CEO of a company." Because what's exciting isn't status, it's the vibe of someone who's growing. The philosopher Kierkegaard said that anxiety is the symptom of freedom. But freedom without direction becomes anguish. And when this anguish overflows into your speech, your gestures, your evasive answers, she feels it. And no matter how beautiful your intentions, the impact is the same. Emotional insecurity. A man anxious about the future doesn't inspire security in the present. And security, as we've seen, is the biological prerequisite for female desire. And if you still think this is an exaggeration, let's go back to Nietzsche. He stated that, "What is good is whatever increases the feeling of power in man." Now think, how will she feel around you if you express doubt, hesitation, and constant uncertainty? Her sense of power diminishes, her energy drops, her emotional libido goes into hibernation. And this happens not because she doesn't like you, but because she can't trust your direction. You become a possibility, not a decision. And no one surrenders to a possibility. What many men don't realize is that the way they answer simple questions defines the entire architecture of attraction. Questions like, "What do you do? What are your plans? What do you want for your life?" They're all unconscious traps, not because she wants to test you, but because the answer reveals your level of clarity, of identity, of presence. A man who answers hesitantly shows he's still negotiating with his own chaos. And that, understandable as it may be, isn't seductive, it's burdensome. Therefore, the key here isn't to invent a pretty story, it's to build a sincere narrative with structure. Even if you're still in a transitional phase, saying, "I'm testing some possibilities, but I'm focused on this right now," sounds completely different from, "I'm still trying to figure out what I want." The former reveals a man in action, the latter reveals a man in waiting. And what attracts is action, movement, the fire of ambition, even if it's still a small flame. And here comes another point that few talk about. Women don't expect you to have already succeeded in life. They're not looking for a ready-made man. They're looking for a man who's on the move. A man who inspires with his energy, his discipline, the way he talks about his projects, even if they're not yet profitable. She wants to feel like she's with someone who will become more, who is in the process of expanding. Because if she feels you're growing, she grows with you. And that's the true eroticism of building together. Want an example? Think of a guy who says something like, "I worked as an engineer for years, but something started bothering me. So I decided to change. Now I'm building an online business. It's been challenging, but I'm learning a lot. I feel more alive than ever." This guy isn't certain, but he has something even more valuable: emotional conviction. And that's infinitely more attractive than any degree or salary. A woman wants a man who takes her on a journey, who has vision. Even if the road is dusty, she'll feel safe if the driver has a steady hand. Now, if the steering wheel shakes, if he looks in the rearview mirror more than ahead, if he doesn't know where he's going, she'll jump out of the car, and she won't leave a note. And there's no point in playing the rebel and saying, I'm free, I don't need to have everything planned out. That's not freedom, that's escape. True freedom arises when you choose a path, even without guarantees. When you embrace a purpose, even without promises. Because freedom without direction is just aesthetic disorientation. And no woman wants to board a plane without a pilot, even if the view from the window is beautiful. So start changing the way you position yourself in the face of the unknown. Don't say, I don't know what I want. Say, I know what I don't want anymore. Don't say, I'm trying to figure it out. Say, I'm testing hypotheses. The difference is subtle, but it changes everything. Because a man who defines himself by denials conveys insecurity, but a man who defines himself by intentions conveys emotional leadership. What she wants is to feel that you have a direction. Even if the path changes, she needs to feel that you hold the helm firmly. And that only happens when you stop using doubt as an excuse and start transforming it into fuel. When you stop apologizing for the phase you're in and start projecting vision with the language of presence. When you understand that clarity isn't about knowing everything. Clarity is about knowing the next step and taking that step with strength. And here's the most important thing. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to lie, exaggerate, or come up with a far-fetched business plan. You just need to understand your own narrative and tell that story truthfully, but with direction. Because, in the end, a woman doesn't connect with what you have. She connects with who you are in motion. With your rhythm, your energy, your internal coherence. And when you learn to talk about your plans with presence, even if they're still under construction, you'll notice a radical change in your interactions. Because a woman will stop evaluating you as a potential problem and will start seeing you as a project worth investing in. Because in the end, she's not looking for a ready-made man. She's looking for a man who knows where he's standing, and who, even when he stumbles, keeps walking. And perhaps on this path, she'll decide to walk by your side, not because you promised certainty, but because you knew how to communicate. Confidence in the chaos. Modern humans have been indoctrinated to believe that vulnerability is a virtue, that exposing wounds creates connection, that opening your heart is synonymous with courage. But there's a brutal, uncomfortable, and often unmentionable truth. Premature vulnerability destroys attraction. It's that simple. No matter how noble the emotional discourse seems, no matter how much self-help books, Instagram coaches, and be yourself gurus repeat the same old story. If you pour out your emotional pain before building connection, you're not being profound, you're being heavy. Imagine you've just met a woman. The conversation flows, she likes your gaze, your sense of humor. But then suddenly, you open your heart. You talk about your father's abandonment, the betrayal you suffered, the scars you carry to this day. And in that instant, something changes in her gaze. Charm turns to caution. Lightness turns to tension. She might even smile, she might even say, wow, that's so intense. But inside, she's already started building a wall. And you won't climb that wall with more sincerity. Because compassion isn't born there. Distrust is. It's hard to accept this, I know, but it's necessary. Because there's a fine line between sharing a scar and opening a still bleeding wound. And when you share your pain too soon, you're effectively outsourcing your emotional care. You're asking a woman who barely knows you to embrace you, understand you, and accept you in your rawest form without first feeling desire, admiration, or mystery. And that's unfair. Not to her. To you. You have every right to have your pain. We all do. But pain is like travel baggage. The sooner you reveal the weight you carry, the less likely someone is to agree to take this journey with you. Not because your pain disqualifies you, but because it alone isn't attractive. And when you reveal too much too soon, you break the logic of discovery. You give yourself away before she's willing to open up. The French philosopher Pascal said, "The heart has reasons that reason itself does not know." And in the game of attraction, this is an invisible law. A woman is not attracted to compassion. She's attracted to energy, presence, magnetism. And these elements are not born of exposed pain, but of transcended pain, of integrated wounding. There is nothing sexier than a man who has faced his past, carried his traumas, and yet moves with confidence and sobriety. He doesn't need to tell his story. It is implicit in every gesture, in every silence. But when a man uses his story as his identity, he doesn't seduce. He begs. He expects to be loved for his raw vulnerability. And this, in practice, transforms him into an emotional project, not a partner. A woman senses this. She may even engage, but not as a woman, as an emotional therapist, as a surrogate mother, as an emotional anchor. And in this place, there is no libido. There is only empathy, which is the opposite of sexual tension. This is why emotional revelations require timing. The problem was never the story, it was the moment it was told. Exposing her trauma in the first week or two of connection is like serving dessert before the main course. It may even be sweet, but it spoils the entire appetite. What she wants, initially, is to be seduced, not recruited for emotional rescue. And here's a metaphor I often use. Your past is like the basement of a house. It's dusty, it has old boxes, it has scars, and that's okay. But you don't invite someone to see your basement on the first date. First, you show them the view from the penthouse, the design of the living room, the light from the balcony. Let them be enchanted by the structure before descending to the dark floors. Because only when there is trust, only when there is enchantment, is there room to delve into pain. That's why the most memorable seducers aren't those who hide the past. They're those who carry it lightly. They're those who have transformed pain into power. And that's what fascinates. When a woman realizes you have shadows but know how to dance in the light. When she senses there's depth, but that this depth is a choice, not a burden. That there is a past, but it doesn't define the present. The big mistake men make when they reveal their wounds too soon is believing it will generate intimacy. But what generates intimacy isn't the pain being shared. It's pain shared at the right time. When there's trust, when there's excitement, when there's bond. Then, yes, revelation becomes connection. It becomes layered, it becomes depth. Before that, it's just emotional weight. And here comes a crucial distinction. Vulnerability is not exposure. Vulnerability is conscious control of one's own story. It's choosing when, how, and with whom to share your downfalls. Not to be saved, but to be understood. Not to be accepted, but to be revealed. And that changes everything. If you want a woman to admire your strength, you need to show your pain as something already overcome, not as a gaping abyss. If you want a woman to desire your presence, you need to be the anchor, not the wet anchor dragging the ship down. And that requires self-awareness, maturity, emotional strategy, because the truth is simple. Everyone experiences pain, but men who know how to pace what they show are the ones who generate the most attraction. Because they know how to build tension. They know how to give pieces, not the whole puzzle. They know how to create the "I want to know more" effect. And that's pure seduction. Want a practical example? In an intimate conversation, you can say something like, "I've been through some very difficult times, but they were precisely what taught me who I am today. One day I'll tell you." There you go. That's emotional bait, a subtle provocation, an invitation for her to want to know more. And when she does want to know, then you choose the moment, calmly, with presence, with poise. Because what a woman wants isn't a broken heart handed to her on a silver platter. It's the feeling that she's accessing something rare, valuable, protected, that you don't tell just anyone. That she's being chosen to experience something few have seen. And then, yes, the past becomes connection, not repulsion. What destroys attraction isn't the truth. It's the desperation to be understood, the rush to be accepted, the anxiety of being loved for the pain you carry. When you understand this, you stop talking about your wounds to every woman who smiles at you. And you begin to realize that true intimacy takes time. It requires context. It requires emotional structure. You don't need to hide your story, but you do need to learn to direct the script of your life like a strategic director. And every good director knows that an untimely revelation destroys the impact of the scene. That emotion needs to be built, that the audience needs to be prepared. Seduction is narrative, and you are the narrator. So from now on, it's not about denying your pain, but about becoming a man who honors it with silence and presence. A man who doesn't need to tell everything to be felt. A man who carries his shadow without spreading it on someone who just arrived. And when you become this man, something magical happens. The woman feels safe to be vulnerable with you. And in this space of built trust, desire grows. Because now there is an emotional foundation, Now there is a mystery. Now there's an internal structure that supports the eroticism of the soul. And that's precisely what we'll talk about in the conclusion. How to tie all these ideas together into a new approach, one where you don't need to lie, hide, or be artificial, but simply keep quiet at the right time. Because in the end, it's not what you say that makes you remembered. At this point, it's no longer about pleasing, nor about avoiding mistakes. It's about understanding that, in the realm of attraction, the men who win aren't the kindest or the most well-intentioned. They're the ones who understand the invisible game behind attention, mystery, and desire. They're the ones who know how to manage silence, harness tension, and control the emotional climate without saying a word more than necessary. They're the ones who understand that presence isn't forced charisma. It's internal structure, energetic mastery, emotional magnetism. If you felt like you've done everything right, but have still been ignored, dismissed, or forgotten, the problem isn't what you did. It's how you appeared in her field. What you conveyed without realizing it. The lack of contrast, the lack of emotional impact. Because what truly makes the difference. And that's exactly why the Forbidden Manual, How to Trigger Desire in 60 Seconds, was created. It's not a theoretical book. It's a strategic system, straight to the point. An audiobook with over 7 hours of narrated content that reveals, step by step, how to trigger desire, tension, and presence that capture her attention in as little as 60 seconds. No childish games, no pre-made formulas, no superficiality, just techniques tested and refined through years of practice, rejection, and real observation of female behavior. Inside, you'll learn how to generate curiosity without appearing needy. How to use silence and body language to create magnetism. How to adjust your presence so she feels something, even if she can't explain it. And along with the audiobook, you'll also receive 3 powerful bonuses: seduction hacks, red flags, and the anti-porn manual. Mental and emotional recalibration tools that put you ahead of most men still stuck in validation cycles. If you're serious about this, if you truly want to become the kind of man who's not just noticed, but desired, then click now. Because this isn't just another piece of content. It's the dividing line that separates those who play the game from those who are still being played.